At a glittering gala, a billionaire's offhand challenge was meant to amuse her wealthy guests, until a young janitor stepped forward and played like his life depended on it. The string lights over the Crystal Bay Hotel ballroom glimmered against polished marble floors, casting a golden reflection that made the evening feel grander than it already was. Guests in sleek gowns and tailored suits moved between tables covered in crisp white linens. The hum of polite conversation mixing with the faint clinking of champagne glasses. Near the far wall, a slightly scuffed baby grand piano sat quietly, almost out of place among the opulence. Sabrina Lockage, 41, stood at the center of a cluster of donors and reporters, wearing a fitted emerald dress that demanded attention. Her hair was styled in soft waves, her smile perfectly measured for the cameras. Known for her dramatic flair and habit of turning small moments into headlines, she was in her element. She tapped her manicured fingers on the piano lid as she looked at the crowd around her. "You know," she said, her voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear, "if anyone here can play this piano flawlessly, I'll marry them tomorrow." It wasn't the kind of comment people took seriously, especially not at a black tie fundraiser. Laughter erupted, light, comfortable, almost indulgent. Some guests exchanged amused glances as if to say classic Sabrina. A few reporters tilted their heads, mentally noting the remark for possible quotes. On the edge of the room, Khalil Brantley was refilling pitchers of ice water. At 27, he was the youngest janitor on staff, having worked at the hotel for only 8 months. His posture was easy, almost unnoticeable as he moved from table to table. But when he heard Sabrina's words, he paused mid-step. He set the pitcher down, walked toward the piano, and spoke just loud enough for the immediate circle to hear. "Do you mean that?" The question cut through the laughter, heads turned. Sabrina glanced at him, surprised, not by his question but by who was asking it. She knew his face and the way people know those who work in the background. Familiar but unnamed, so "Tasanda nasatins." "I suppose I do," she replied, tilting her head with a smirk. "Why are you planning to audition?" A ripple of amusement passed through the group. Someone whispered, "Oh, this will be interesting. This nadinander dandandidurim." Another donor chuckled under their breath, clearly expecting a short-lived spectacle. Khalil didn't smile back. Instead, he stepped closer, running one hand lightly over the worn edge of the piano. "If you're serious," he said evenly, "then let's see how serious you really are." The mood shifted slightly, not enough to silence the laughter, but enough to make people lean in. A reporter raised their phone. One of the hotel managers moved closer, possibly to intervene if things got awkward. Sabrina, enjoying the sudden attention, gestured toward the bench. "By all means," she said, "show us what you got." Khalil set his work caddy aside and eased himself onto the bench. His uniform, a navy shirt with the hotel logo embroidered above the chest pocket, looked out of place against the polished black wood. He took a breath, placed his fingers on the keys, and paused for a moment. A few people in the crowd exchanged skeptical looks. One man murmured, "This is going to be over quick." Another leaned into his companion and whispered, "I'll give him 30 seconds. Dansar. But Khalil didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't care. His eyes stayed on the keys. The first notes he played were slow, deliberate, almost testing the piano's voice. The tone wasn't perfect, but he adjusted instinctively, his touch careful yet assured. Within seconds, the melody began to shift. His fingers moved faster, each note linking to the next with an ease that didn't match his job title or his work uniform. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. "Number sendidin ka andimne." The laughter faded completely. Even those who had been looking at their phones lowered them without realizing it. What had started as a room full of polite amusement was slowly becoming something else entirely, something no one had anticipated when the night began. But the tension didn't truly break until the whispers started, and they weren't the kind that came with laughter anymore. It started quietly, just a few murmurs at the back of the semicircle surrounding the piano. A woman in a pearl necklace leaned toward her husband and whispered, "He probably only knows one song, Mondan fein kerens, montornani tindits." Her husband grinned faintly, his eyes never leaving Khalil's hands, as if waiting for him to hit a wrong note. Near the buffet table, two young men in tailored suits exchanged smirks. One of them, holding a half-empty glass of champagne, muttered, "What's the bet he plays something like Chopsticks? Not near de near pontuers," and calls it a day. They both chuckled, not bothering to hide it. Khalil's expression didn't change. He kept his gaze on the keys, shoulders relaxed, the slight sway of his upper body following the rhythm as if he were in his own world. The sound was rich, warm, and far more complex than anyone expected. Yet the comments continued, though they grew less certain. "Where did he learn that?" a middle-aged man asked, frowning slightly. "Probably YouTube," someone answered with a light laugh, but it lacked conviction. Sabrina, leaning against the piano, tried to maintain her smirk. She had meant her comment as a harmless quip, a spark for conversation, not as an actual challenge. But now, with every passing measure, she found herself studying Khalil more closely. His posture, the control in his touch, the way he paused just enough to let the room breathe before diving into another sequence. "Not bad," she said casually, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "But let's see if you can keep that up for more than a minute." Khalil didn't respond verbally. Instead, his left hand shifted into a deep, resonant chord progression while his right hand danced over the higher keys with a light, almost teasing precision. The melody grew more intricate, weaving patterns that seemed effortless yet demanded skill. The young man with the champagne raised his eyebrows. "Okay, maybe not chopsticks." From the far side of the room, a hotel chef in a white jacket stepped out from behind the service door. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Khalil. A couple of waiters still holding trays slowed their steps to watch. It wasn't just the wealthy guests who were drawn in now. The staff had noticed too. One woman in a sequined navy dress turned to Sabrina. "He's actually good. Really good." Sabrina waved her hand lightly, still trying to appear unbothered. "Talent can come from anywhere," she said, but the edge in her voice betrayed that she hadn't expected this. Khalil, meanwhile, shifted into a section that blended a soft, aching melody with sudden surges of intensity. It was the kind of playing that made you feel something even if you didn't know the song. The notes didn't just fill the room. They seemed to press into it, bending the atmosphere until it was impossible to ignore. And yet, from the edge of the crowd, a man in a dark gray suit muttered, "Betty still can't read sheet music." The remark was low, but Khalil heard it. He didn't look up, didn't break tempo, but his right hand climbed higher into the keys, striking a clear, ringing note before spiraling back into the melody. A woman in the front row, arms folded, tilted her head. "Where did you learn to play like that?" she asked. Khalil finally spoke, his voice even. "Not here." The answer drew a few chuckles, but not mocking ones this time. It was the kind of reaction people give when they sense a story they don't know yet, a story they suddenly want to hear. Sabrina tapped the lid again, this time without the earlier smugness. "All right, surprise us," she said, as if trying to reassert control over a situation she had started but no longer directed. Khalil's hands moved faster now, cascading through runs that that seemed to challenge the piano itself. His foot pressed the sustain pedal at just the right moments, letting the harmonies hang in the air before shifting them into something new. The murmurs faded. The smirks were gone. Even the man in the dark gray suit had straightened his posture, no longer speaking. Sabrina crossed her arms, watching him as if measuring him against something invisible. But the real shift came when the first person in the crowd stopped looking at him like a novelty and started looking at him like an artist. Khalil's fingers glided over the keys as though they had been born there, each movement deliberate yet fluid, like water finding its way downstream. He no longer played for the people in the room. His gaze was fixed on the piano, but his mind seemed somewhere far away, someplace only he could see. The piece shifted into a slow, minor key passage that drew the air tight. The lower registers rumbled with depth, while the upper notes floated above like fragments of a forgotten memory. It wasn't just skill, it was storytelling. Every chord felt like a sentence, every run like a paragraph building towards something neither he nor the audience fully understood until it arrived. Guests who had been standing casually now leaned forward slightly. A woman in a crimson dress clasped her hands in front of her, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she listened. Even the waitstaff in the back of the room had stopped moving trays and stood still, eyes fixed on the piano. Then without warning, Khalil pivoted. His right hand sprang into a rapid flurry of notes, each one sharp and clean, while his left hand countered with deep rolling bass lines that felt almost like thunder. The contrast was electric. Light against dark, soft against strong. Sabrina felt her breath catch, though she wouldn't admit it. She had been around money, power, and influence all her life, but moments that felt this raw, this unfiltered, were rare. She could feel the shift in the room, and it made her pulse quicken. From behind the crowd, someone whispered, "That's Rachmanov, so nine dundee me tinkerdim." Another replied, "No, listen closely. He's mixing it with something else. That's his own. So, that's Sir Albert Ingdant." Khalil's eyes closed for just a second as his fingers moved faster, the melody bending and twisting as if testing its own limits. The audience couldn't tell if they were listening to a classical piece they should recognize or something entirely new. All they knew was that it was pulling them in. Midway through, his left hand hit a series of chords that rang so powerfully the room seemed to vibrate. The sustain pedal caught the resonance, and for a moment it felt like the music wasn't just in the air. It was in the floor beneath their feet. Sabrina shifted her stance, crossing one ankle over the other, and whispered to the woman beside her, "I didn't think he'd be this good." The woman only nodded, her eyes still locked on Khalil. He transitioned again, softening into a gentle, almost lullaby-like tune. It was intimate, fragile, even, like something you might hear through a door late at night. It made the space between notes feel as important as the notes themselves. People held their breath without realizing it, afraid that even the smallest sound might break whatever was happening. Then, with a subtle lift of his hands, Khalil brought the piece back to life. The melody climbed higher and higher, the chords underneath growing more insistent, more urgent. It was as if he were racing towards something only he could see. In the front row, a man in his 60s lowered his phone. He had been recording since Khalil began, but now for the first time, he just wanted to listen without a screen between them. Khalil's final sequence was nothing short of staggering. Right hand spinning out rapid arpeggios, left hand hammering a counter rhythm that felt like the heartbeat of the piece itself. His shoulders moved with the motion, but never sloppily. Every ounce of him was in control. When the last note came, it didn't just stop. It lingered in the air for a moment, the piano's natural resonance holding on before finally releasing. Khalil's hands rested on the keys, his head slightly bowed, as if giving the moment a chance to breathe before anyone dared to speak. There was no polite applause this time. The room erupted, cheers, whistles, clapping that went on longer than any toast of the night. Some guests stood without thinking. Others simply stared at him as if they weren't sure what they had just witnessed. Sabrina clapped along, but her mind was already spinning. She had issued a challenge, expecting a laugh and a quick end. Instead, she had just watched a janitor command a room full of millionaires and leave them stunned. She stepped forward, her voice softer now. "That wasn't what I expected," she said, her eyes scanning his face for something she couldn't name. Khalil finally looked at her, his expression calm. "Most things worth remembering aren't," he replied. A murmur of approval passed through the crowd. Not loud, but genuine. But the real conversation was only just beginning, and it wasn't going to stay inside this ballroom for long. The applause didn't fade so much as it was interrupted by conversations breaking out in every corner of the room. People leaned toward each other, voices low but animated, as if they'd just witnessed something they weren't quite sure how to process. Sabrina stayed near the piano, still trying to read Khalil. She had built a career and a public persona around controlling the narrative. Yet now she could feel the story slipping out of her hands and into his. A woman in her 50s wearing a silver wrap over her gown approached the piano. "Young man," she said, smiling warmly, "where did you learn to play like that?" Khalil rested his hands in his lap. "At home," he said simply. "Old upright my mom bought for $50 from a church down the street. Keys were chipped. A couple didn't work, but it was enough to teach myself. Na fruit den 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 prins, denisrins." The woman's smile softened. "Well, it worked." From the side, a man in a tuxedo interjected with a tone that was half curious, half dismissive. "So, no formal training, no conservatory, just figured it out." Khalil glanced at him briefly. "Figuring it out is the training," he said. The comment drew a small laugh from someone in the back, and even Sabrina cracked a smile at that. Then came the hotel's general manager, an older man with salt and pepper hair, who placed a hand on Khalil's shoulder. "You've been working here how long?" "8 months," Khalil replied. "And you've been hiding this the whole time?" "I wasn't hiding anything," Khalil said, his voice steady. "No one ever asked." That answer landed heavier than expected. Several people shifted uncomfortably as if they'd just been reminded of something they didn't want to acknowledge. "Nasir bivorkat nothing set." Sabrina tilted her head. "You know, I think you've just made me break my own rule." "What rule?" Khalil asked. "Never be upstaged at my own event." There was laughter at that, but it was good-natured now. The smirks and whispered jokes had vanished, replaced with something closer to respect, or at least curiosity. A reporter from the Charlotte Observer stepped forward, her phone held out. "Khalil, can I get a quick video of you saying your name and where you're from? This is going to get a lot of attention." Khalil hesitated. "I'd rather the video speak for itself." The reporter seemed taken aback, but nodded and stepped back. From behind the crowd, a voice called out, "Play another one. Sardinanda and Nitiden." Several others echoed it, and for a moment it seemed like he might. But Khalil shook his head gently. One was enough. Sabrina studied him for another beat before saying, "Then I suppose you'll be leaving everyone here wondering, Salmat ner thankin ner meet in thinders." He stood from the bench, and people instinctively parted to let him through. A few guests reached out to shake his hand. Others offered compliments, some sincere, some more performative, but Khalil accepted them all with the same calm nod. Sabrina watched him cross the ballroom toward the service hallway. For a woman used to commanding a room, it was rare to see someone else take that authority without even trying. She couldn't tell if it irritated her or impressed her. Near the doorway, a young waiter caught up to Khalil. "Man, I didn't even know you played." That was insane. Khalil smiled faintly. It's just something I've always done. Something that sounded like a whole life's work. Khalil didn't answer right away. He adjusted the strap on his cleaning caddy and said, maybe it is. San nenin. Then, he disappeared into the hallway, the heavy door swinging shut behind him. Back at the piano, Sabrina rested her hand on the lid. The room was still buzzing. Guests talking about him, the performance, and inevitably the fact that the person who had just stolen the night was the hotel janitor. She knew the clip would be online before she even got home. A man beside her leaned in. You realize this is going viral, right? I'd be surprised if it isn't already, she replied. But what none of them knew yet was that the conversation outside these walls was going to grow much louder than anything said inside them. By the time Sabrina's driver pulled up to drop her at her high-rise apartment, her phone was already vibrating non-stop. Texts from colleagues, notifications from social media, and 2 missed calls from her publicist filled the screen. One of the first messages read, "Is this your gala? Tandinandatas descending dan and seen." The piano guy. It came with a link to a video already posted on Twitter. The clip was raw, shaky, clearly taken from a guest's phone, but it captured everything. The moment Khalil sat down, the skeptical chuckles, the way the room fell silent, and then the roaring applause. In less than 3 hours, it had racked up over 300,000 views. By morning, it would be in the millions. On Instagram, the hashtags were multiplying. Have piano janitor, hashtag our hidden genius Khalil Brantley. Some posts praised him as a prodigy who proved that real talent doesn't need a stage to be found. Others were sharper, turning the spotlight on the way the guests had initially treated him. A popular TikTok creator had already stitched the clip with commentary. You can see the moment the rich people realized they underestimated him. The video was drawing thousands of comments, many of them tagging friends with messages like, "Watch this all the way through. Worth it. In Satmas den main den name amt." By 10 a.m. the next day, Khalil's name was trending on Twitter alongside international news headlines. A screenshot of Sabrina's stunned face during the performance was circulating widely. Someone had captioned it, "When you challenged the wrong guy." Meanwhile, Khalil was at home in his small apartment above a laundromat on Beechwood Avenue. He had an old laptop on his kitchen table, its screen glowing with unread notifications. A friend from high school had messaged, "Bro, you're everywhere right now. You need to start a YouTube channel or something." Khalil sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He had never sought fame, and the thought of suddenly becoming a public figure felt strange. Music had always been personal, something he shared with a few friends, maybe an occasional open mic night. Now it was being dissected by strangers all over the world. Back at the Crystal Bay Hotel, the general manager was fielding media requests. Local news stations wanted interviews. National outlets were calling. Even a morning talk show in Los Angeles had reached out. Sabrina, sipping her coffee in her living room, took a call from her publicist. "This is an opportunity," the woman said briskly. "You need to get ahead of this. People love the clip, but some are criticizing the way the room reacted at first. You need to comment. Show that you're supportive." "I am supportive," Sabrina replied. "I told him to play. I didn't stop him." "That's not how the internet works," her publicist said dryly. "We should arrange for you and Khalil to meet publicly. A photo op. Maybe a follow-up performance." Sabrina stared out the window at the skyline. "He's not a prop. If he wants to meet, fine. If not, I'm not forcing it." Khalil, meanwhile, was scrolling through the comments on one of the viral posts. Most were kind, but some were cynical, suggesting it was a stunt, questioning if he had planted the performance to get attention. Later that afternoon, a journalist from the Charlotte Ledger called him. "Khalil, people want to know, do you plan to pursue music music full-time now? I haven't decided, he said. I like playing, always have, but I don't think a viral video should decide my life for me. The reporter paused. What do you want people to take away from all this? That you don't know someone just by looking at them, Khalil replied. And maybe that talent doesn't come with a dress code. By that evening, the clip had reached national television. A news anchor introduced it as the performance that stopped a gala in its tracks. Footage of Khalil playing aired alongside commentary from music critics and social media personalities. At the hotel, guests from the previous night were calling staff to talk about the moment. Some swore they had recognized his skill immediately, though the video clearly suggested otherwise. Others wanted to know if he'd be performing again. Sabrina knew the story had already grown beyond her control. Her own inbox was full of invitations to appear on panels about hidden talent and class perception, but she also knew the only person who could decide what happened next was Khalil himself. But the real shift wasn't in the number of views or headlines. It was in the fact that for the first time, people were asking who Khalil really was. And that question was about to lead somewhere neither of them expected. 2 days after the gala, Khalil found himself sitting at a small table in a quiet corner of Marlowe's Coffee House, a spot just off Main Street where the morning rush had long passed. He had agreed to meet Sabrina, not in front of cameras, not at the hotel, but here. She had insisted on keeping it low-key, saying she wanted to talk without an audience. She arrived 5 minutes late, sliding into the chair opposite him with an apologetic smile. Traffic, she said, setting her leather tote on the floor. Khalil nodded. No problem. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the espresso machine and the faint hum of soft jazz filled the gap. Then, Sabrina leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. I owe you an apology, she said plainly. That night, I turned you into a joke without even thinking about it, and you turned the whole thing into something I couldn't have predicted. Khalil's eyes stayed steady on hers. I didn't do it to prove you wrong. I know, she said, which makes it even more embarrassing for me.